Okay, greetings everyone. I am here with poet, writer, and HR professional Eddie Lartey. He's also a poetry champion. We will get into that in a couple minutes. Eddie has agreed to come join our creative conversations, and I can't wait to delve into his mind and his world, which seems pretty exciting lately. So, welcome, Eddie.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Okay, so first question, just like a warm-up question, Eddie, since we are into the world of words, is there a song or poem that you know all the words to?
Ah, there's a few. Um, I want to say drop it like it's hot for nostalgic purposes. um,
Okay.
but definitely there are a couple J. Cole songs that I know. Um, there are a couple Afrobeat songs, but I don't know if the pronunciation's all the way correct. So I'm not gonna say any of them. But definitely
Which
definitely drop it like it's hot for sure.
drop it like it's hot. Okay, all right. We can okay. So what is the significance of the lyrics to drop it like it's hot for you?
I think it was early on in my hip hop phase where I'm like, okay, where I went from, you know, music my mom played on the radio, which is like this easy rock, Celine Dion, Shania Twain music, to like having my access to like hip hop and all these different
Mm,
things. I was like, okay, this is cool. I think Drop It Like It's Hot came out. I'm like, oh, like when I was in the hip hop lane, it was very much gangster rap. Like that was 2003, 50 Cent, Get Rich or Die Trying. But then Drop It Like It's Hot came out. I'm like, oh, we can be partying. We can have fun and still be, little tough guys. I get this. This is cool. And it was just such a vibe and so cool. Um, and also just the flow. Um, and of course, you have Snoop, you have Pharrell. Can't go wrong.
okay, cool. Interesting. Did you find that you could like relate to that tough guy image?
I think I related to both. I thought it was really cool having Pharrell talking about like skater stuff, and then you have Snoop
Mm,
talking about like gangster Crip stuff, and I'm like, oh, these both can exist.
okay.
And I think like both can exist in such a celebratory vibe. But I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I could do this too. I can exist here. And I think it's just a cool groove and that celebration of that duality and really being yourself uh really, really took hold for me.
Nice. Do you feel like there's that in you, like a duality, like of yeah, presentation, I guess, in you?
I think there's a duality in a lot of things in me. I'm not just one thing. Um I think it's I like to say this. I'm a multifaceted person. I think there's so many different dynamics to me. And I love when people fully understand all those different dynamics or really dive deep into one and then they see how interconnected everything is. I'm not just Eddie the poet, I'm Eddie the HR professional, I'm Eddie the anime enthusiast, I'm Eddie the fantasy basketball lover. Um I'm also like, old school romantic, but also like very much a gym rat. Like all these
Mhm.
different things
Okay.
that people think can't exist or don't necessarily exist within a black body. I'm all these things. And I think poetry is giving me the space to express them, but just also just daily life as well.
Mhm. I love it. So, going from that multifacet of things kind of back, I read
Mm.
in a interview, I think it was CBC, where you did say that you had wanted to be a rapper at one point. And then that merged into like finding just the words, like you just gonna work with the words.
Yes. Yes, that is true. I was rapping. I'm pretty sure I've deleted all copies of any rap songs. But yeah, I used to like print the lyrics of songs. I'm like, if I was to do it, this is how I would
Mm,
remix it. I remix old songs, and just to sharpen the pen and have some fun.
cool. And then how did you discover like that the words alone were enough?
So it went from rap to battle rap. Like I was out here, I'm like, I want to battle everyone who's a rapper. And then so it always became about, okay, I need to have the most creative lines to outshine
Mhm.
my opponent. And so it was from a very competitive sense, right? Um, and I think after that, I'm like, okay, it's, tearing something down is easier, but how do we build up this image? And I think I found poetry. And there's also a creative writing class where we had to share our work at the end of class. Excuse me. And I realized everyone wanted to read my work, and I was like, oh my goodness, like I think I might be good at this. So I really just decided to really hone the craft and really study it, and then get really good. So yeah, the switch just felt very natural.
Okay, so this is like in high school creative writing or
Yeah, high school, grade 12.
okay, right at the end.
Yeah, and then uni started doing open mics, started gaining a lot of traction. Then I discovered slam that year as well. I discovered slam at the end of my first year. Um, I was broke. I spent all my OSAP money, and they said slam top three get $100, and I was like, yeah,
Ooh,
I
big
can do
money.
this. Do this. I need that. I did it. Came second. Then they're like, we have another slam next week. I said another $100. Okay. Um, did it again, and then they offered me a spot on a team, and uh, the rest is history.
So did you know you were competing to be on the team?
The second time, no, I just saw the 100. I didn't read the
Uh,
fine print. Um, and then they offered me the spot, and I was like, yeah, absolutely. They're teams. This is amazing. And
okay.
then I signed the contract instantly.
So so when you say team, you don't mean a specific team that's going to competition, you mean like an ongoing team? Can you just go into that a bit?
Oh yeah, it was. We were definitely going to competition. We were going to nationals.
Okay.
Um, it was the last chance slam. So like what
Oh,
poetry
okay.
scenes do is like they'll have slams throughout the year. But then they'll have like a last chance slam where they're like, hey, if you want to make the team, hit like use the slam to get there. So you have I think you have to at least slam twice. So and then I was able to do that and it really worked out. But it was a team that was going to competition. It was a team, especially the way hype worked back then. So you make the team for the year, right? So it's a year-round contract.
Okay.
Um, so you make the team, and then you do competitions with that team throughout the year, and then at the end of the year, you have to slam again, and hopefully you make that spot back onto that team.
Okay, so that's what's different. I don't know how other cities do it, but none of the cities that I've lived in have had like a year-round team, so that's why, like, or sign, I never signed anything. So that's you guys are pretty official.
Yeah.
That's dope. So do you write on paper or a digital device for your first draft?
Ooh, I love this question because it's so important to do both. But if I'm going to be super super honest, I don't write at all. Until I have like a rough skeleton or idea of what the poem is going to look like. So I will have an idea. I'm like, oh, this conversation gave me an idea for a poem. I will probably sit on this idea for 2 weeks, a month,
Mhm.
and then I'll be thinking about it, marinating. And every time I zone out in conversation, I'm thinking about this conversation. I'm like, okay, oh, but like this would be a really cool line that refers back to this. Or there's a message in here that's a poem.
Uh,
How do I build on that? And then I'll be in the shower thinking about it, thinking about it. It's marinating. A couple lines get added, a couple lines get added, a couple lines get forgotten, which is why I should probably write in the beginning. I also send myself a series of voice notes where I'm
okay.
like I'll be like asleep and I'm like, oh no no, da-da-da-da-da-da. I need to remember this.
That's a good idea.
And by the time the poem is roughly done, I'm like, okay, this poem needs to exist on paper, or this poem needs to exist elsewhere.
Wow.
So I'll probably type it out, and then I'm like, okay, I want to keep playing with it. If I want to keep playing with it after typing it out, we're writing it out, and then we're writing it out. So in my workbook, like when work is not busy, which is never nowadays, I have my right hand side of my workbook, of my notebook, is for work. The left hand side is what I call leftovers, and it's
Ooh.
for things that have existed in my head where I need to get out and play with. Um, I think it's much more fun to play with poems and edit on paper. I
Hmm.
think the efficiency and the quickness I can get it out on text um, is beneficial as well. But I think it's much more fun on a piece of paper.
Okay, so it lives in your head and it kind of grows in your head until it's almost fully formed.
Yeah,
So like kind of like a human being that like forms to a point and then you give birth to it.
I gotta deliver it.
Wow. So okay, that's really interesting to me because you said you do lose some lines,
Yes,
but you're I guess you just it goes on. Like
yeah,
you just like oh well.
yes. I used to have this rationale where I'm like, if I forgot it, it wasn't worth remembering. But as you get older,
It's risky
you don't
business.
remember everything, and then like things get super busy, and you have work, and you have life, you have family. You're like not everything can fit in this head. Like so, I've been trying to voice note things and leave clues to myself to
Okay.
trigger memory a lot more these days.
Okay. And then, so once you do that, so you're building it piece by piece, and
Hmm.
then you transfer it. So sounds like sometimes it's typed out, but sometimes it's on paper.
It's always generally both, right? It's typed out, and then it's on paper, and then the final
Okay.
version is always typed out.
Right.
I go back to that draft and just edit.
Okay. Okay. But at first, it could come out depending on where you are. If you're at work, you're sneaking in some time and
Yeah,
writing your leftovers paid.
yeah,
Okay. Very cool. Yeah, I love you're saying it's more fun to write on paper too. And I do wonder like how people if it's people are leaving it behind, it seems like, but it feel like it has a different feeling. Like you can see the words differently on paper,
absolutely.
even though my writing is crazy, like it's not nice. But yeah, I
Me
can see it
neither.
differently. All right, that's cool. That's very interesting. Um, this is probably a hard one to answer, but do you have I'm gonna say in the last year, because I know you've been like doing a lot in the last year. So is there one that has special meaning to you in the last year?
A poem that has special meaning?
Yeah, of your own.
They all do, but pick one. Ah, yeah, yeah. I'm gonna pick one. I'm gonna pick
Okay.
one. In the last year, that's tough. There's two.
Well,
Okay, there's two.
okay, I
It's
thought
two.
that parameter might make it easy, but you can pick if one comes to your mind from like 3 years ago, just one that's special.
There's two. Okay,
Okay.
two because of the lengths that I went to write this poem. What was tough. I wrote this poem called uh "The Darkest Pity Party." Right.
Hmm.
Um, Amazing poem. And I used it and I slammed. I won this competition. It was great. And then I had another competition where I'm like, it's good, but like I need to level it up. I need something. And then I've been trying to. Everything I was writing wasn't hitting the way I wanted it to hit. And I'm like, no, we have to level it. It's a good one. It's great as is, but we need to take it to the next level. So I started just working away, just trying to put myself in different experiences. I always when people ask me how to become a better poet, I tell them uh don't focus on being a better poet, focus on being a better person, right?
Hmm.
Open yourself up to love, open yourself up to new experiences. Eventually those things will find your way into your work, right?
I love that.
Um so I was like, you know what? Like this poem, I need to do something different. So I remember I ended up watching When They See Us. I don't know if you remember the Santa Clark
I didn't
documentary.
watch it to be like
Oh,
I feel like I'm getting really fragile and I can't take in certain things, so I didn't watch it.
I, I was fragile. I was fragile. Let me tell you that. I watched it. I remember I took a couple of days off to prepare myself for the competition because it was a big money competition, and I watched it. Oh, I wept. I
Mm.
wept, and then I remember allowing myself to feel all those things, and especially as men, we don't allow ourselves to feel certain things. I remember I had I started crying. I went downstairs. I saw my sister. And she's like, "Yo, what's wrong with you?" She gave me a hug. She
Aw.
just breathe. It's okay. I couldn't talk. And I'm like, I'm busy going back up to finish watch. She's like, why? I'm like, I need to feel this. And it's just like, you're crazy.
You went back for more?
I went back and I finished it. Ow, I thought I finished crying. I was like, this is what I want the audience to feel. And I went back and I wrote it. That same like 5-10 minute span.
Mhm.
And I never do it. I never just write. But I was like, no, no, no. And then the lines that came out of that experience, oh, it was beautiful. And so pushing myself to feel certain things,
Mhm.
and I think that changed my process for me, where I'm like, okay, cool. I don't just have to think about things; I have to feel them in their entirety. And I think it's also why people are like, oh, write me a poem. I'm like, no, you don't understand. this
I
is
know.
this is the whole spiritual process.
Right.
It's not just, oh, she's pretty, like insert metaphor here. No, I have to feel, I have to cry, I have to sit
Yeah.
with this emotion. I have to like pray about this, speak to a therapist before I like this thing is done. Like, I know. It's not just write me a poem. It doesn't know.
Yeah.
So I think that changed the process and deepened the emotion in which I put into poems. So I'll say that. And then we're going from the last year, I wrote this poem on Black love. Um it's not the I wrote the poem a while ago, so it's not the writing of the poem. I remember I did the poem in Brazil, and I was worried because I was like, um, first they were asking me for a writing sample. I thought they just wanted a writing sample. Also, most of the instructions were in Portuguese, so I didn't understand. But what they wanted was the poems I was going to use to slam, and I would typically wouldn't have slammed with this poem. And then I was like, oh no, like I thought they just wanted a writing sample, but here we are. I have to slam with this. I'm in Brazil. A lot of people speak Portuguese. Not a lot of people speak English. I know the words are translated behind me. I don't
Mm.
know if this poem's gonna come across. And like, it's a black love is a very niche thing.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm sitting there stressing. I'm like, no, you know what? Let's figure out how to emote this feeling. So it was a lot of practice in terms of performance, right?
Okay.
Um, not just the words, but like being in love. And I think as
Mm.
poets, we get used to angry poems. We're like, ah,
Yeah.
and so I'm practicing, and then my coaches were like, are you mad or in love? I can't tell. And then so I was like, you know what, I'm in love, and they're like, okay, be in love. And I
Show
was like,
us
okay.
love.
I had to like, when do I feel love? When do I like again go back
Mm.
into that the feeling and really harness it and sit with it and bring it out. And so I worked on it, and then
Mm.
you see me smiling throughout the piece. You see moments where I'm like almost tearing up, and um, uh, I think poetry has often been a shield for me at times where I hide behind big metaphors. I'm like, I'm really telling you about my life, but there's this nice metaphor where I'm like, I feel really safe in this
Okay.
wordplay. You don't necessarily know what's going on, but like it's the writing's great, so you like it. But now I'm like, oh, sitting there, I'm like, oh, I'm in love. Like you see it on my face, you see the way I hold the mic, even like, and I did that in Brazil, perfect scores. And I was like, oh, Black love exists here too, eh? Okay,
Mm.
we're chilling. Not all the judges were black, but like I think they felt it.
Right.
Um, so I think those two poems really hold a special place for me. Just learning how to emote um to the fullest capability. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, okay. I'm like, I wish I was there. But I love what you're saying about pretty much everything, but just really that it's not all the way back to when you said it's not about being a good poet necessarily specifically, but feeling it. And I think that's the difference that I noticed between poetry that was meant for paper and poetry that was performed was that, and when I studied it in school, we were like, okay, how many stanzas? What form is this? And I actually love form. I'm like, oh, this is cool. But when I saw it performed, I was like, oh, you felt it. And even as you said, it's not necessarily that I relate, but I can still feel what you're giving me. And I think that's like the magic there. So that's really cool. Tell us about Brazil. So, for those who don't know, Eddie is 2022. You've had a lot of wins under your belt. So I'm just gonna
Yeah.
mention the last big two. Eddie is the 2022 Canadian Individual Poetry Slam champion. It's called
Yep.
SIPS, which takes place in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada.
Hmm.
And then most recently, I think it was in December,
Yep.
that you won the International Poetry Slam in Brazil.
Yes.
Oh, congratulations. That's huge. That's like the world. So that's really cool. And I wanted to ask about, I mean, I guess you answered it in a way, but maybe you want to say more, how it felt going up there and delivering a poem to people who did not understand what you're saying. And you're saying you practiced it. So how was
Oh,
it when you got there and it was like, it's showtime?
so it was a ton of practice. I'm not gonna hold you. It was a ton of practice because I'm going there by myself in a
Mhm.
foreign country. Um, I don't speak Spanish. I don't speak Portuguese. Like we're just gonna have to make this. We're just gonna have to rock with this.
Wow.
Um,
So you traveled by yourself? You didn't go with like a homie, coach,
no,
anything?
I
Okay.
was solo.
Wow.
Um, and then so I'm staying in a hostel in the favelas. Um, so it was a lot. But I want to say this: the organization, FOO, they're amazing. They really made it feel like a community. Um, even though I didn't speak the language, they make me feel connected. So that was beautiful. That was wonderful. Um, before performing was the first night was great. The first night, um, I had what a lot of poets strive for. You know that perfect night where you get perfect scores in both poems. You're like, I'm good.
Mm.
The second night, I went to the beach in the day. Big mistake. It was hot. I didn't realize I was hot until I got back, and I was like, "Oh, I'm chilling. I'm good." I was also fatigued. I only really ate breakfast because I don't like to eat before my performances. So they drove us out to the venue at 4 p.m. I ended up performing at 10 p.m. I didn't have any Brazilian money, which is real. I didn't have any money on me, so I didn't buy anything.
Oh my
I was
goodness.
like I had the water that I brought with me, and that was it.
So you wanted to suffer.
Oh, and there was a concert next door, and so we had to project. Oh my goodness, it was rough. I stumbled through a couple of poems, and I'm like, oh, and like that night was rough. I think I came second that night, but I was lucky. And typically during a slam, I take the scores, and I'm like, okay, I'm calculating. I'm like, seeing who's in the lead, what happens, and you're strategizing as you're doing it. This one was a Jesus take the wheel moment. I was like, no scores for me. I also don't speak Portuguese. I don't really know what the scores are. I know dis. I know nueve is nine. Uh, besides that,
The rest you
I'm
be
lost.
rounding up, rounding down.
Um, so I was like, you know what, Jesus take the wheel. There's a lot of prayer. I think it was a
Mm.
very spiritual experience and very community based experience where I'm like, okay, cool. Um, I'm advanced to finals. Finals night, my director calls me. She's like, "Hey, I watched semifinals. Yeah, you look a little shaky. Here's what we're gonna do." And I'm like, I ended up walking to the ATM, got some money, got some fruits, got um everything I really needed, and I prayed, I rehearsed, and then I just left it. I'm like, Jesus, you got me. You brought me here. Let's go. Um, whatever happens, happens, and it was great. Honestly, the community is so great. I think unlike most competitions you're competing, but everyone's really friendly. This one, it felt very family oriented.
Okay. How did they do that? Like, what about it made it community or family?
One thing they did was, even though some people didn't speak English, they would try. They made that effort where they're like, they're struggling to communicate. I'm struggling to communicate, but like there was love in that struggle. Like I was like, okay, like I understand. It's like kind of like when you're trying to speak to your grandmother, right? Like let's say your grandmother doesn't understand English, and you're like, And you're like, hey, no, Grandma, it's this. And she's like, no, this. And I'm like, no, 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 this. And then so like you could tell there's care. One thing they also did was they also like, hey, Eddie doesn't really speak Spanish out here. We're never leaving him alone. Just don't
Mm.
like I think after the first night they're like, okay, this man's gonna wander off by himself. Don't let him do that. And so they always paired, and then like I'm not gonna say no one spoke English. There were like maybe 10% of the people who were of the organizers, maybe
Okay.
10, 15, spoke English, and they were beside me all the time. So they ended up sitting beside me. They're like, okay, this is what's going on. This is what's happening, and like everyone celebrated everyone's wins.
Nice.
So it felt very very family oriented. Um, so and also I think as I stayed more in Brazil, I started realizing, oh, Brazilians are basically Africans. And then being from Ghana, I'm like, oh, this is home. This is like Ghana with a twist. Um, and I started to feel very comfortable. And the more I felt comfortable, the more I trusted in God just flowing through me and just being an instrument. It ended up working out for me.
Wow, I guess it did.
Yeah. So that final night, my first poem, I'm like, okay. My second poem, I'm like, oh, they said nueve a couple of times. I'm like, oh, I don't know. Um, and then my third poem, I'm like, think I'm in the lead. I'm like, I don't know. But then someone else came up, and I was like, I think it might be a tie. I think I might be second. No, let me prepare this fourth poem just in case there's a tie. And
Wow.
they're like, hey, congratulations. I'm like, no, no, I don't think you did your math right. And then I'm like, look at me. I don't understand the language, but I'm telling people they didn't do the math right. And then I'm like, so I'm prepared. I'm like, up until they call all the poets to the stage, I'm preparing my fourth poem. I'm like, I'm ready to go. Like, we have to go the distance. And then they called me up, and I'm like, okay. They announced fourth. They announced fifth. They announced fourth. Okay. They announced third. They announced second. What that means? Does that mean? Then I ended up winning, and it was great. Um,
I saw that clip and I always wonder like what's going through people's mind because it's like as you're watching like obviously it's you, but I feel like there's always a pause you're like where you're like, wait a second, if I'm not second, it just takes a second to realize that like there's no one left.
exactly, exactly. And I think that was a beautiful feeling, and it meant a lot for
Mm.
me. Um, I like to say this is not necessarily my achievement, but um, Hamilton's. Like, I really want people to see, hey, um, if he could do it, so can I, right? Um, and I think Hamilton gets slept on in terms of the arts. We often get overshadowed by Toronto, and so for me to be from the city and win it really meant a lot for me. And the amount of people who were inspired and who believed in me, I knew I couldn't let them down. So it's a
Ah,
lot.
that's beautiful.
Opportunities that are coming out of it are really, really great. Of course, in your profile, you get little profile things, and then you're like, hey, yesterday's price is not today's price. Um,
Amen. That's
and
right.
then so blessings.
Your price has gone up. Give
Yeah,
thanks.
amen.
Um, okay, so I want to ask you a couple more questions. So for the person who was like, "Oh, Eddie did it, so can I." You talked about your early influences, being into rap, then wanting to battle, and then realizing you have to like level it up, and then being about love and a better person. So a lot goes into your craft, into your art. And then also, as somebody who knows some of your poems, I know you use a lot of metaphor.
Hmm.
I want to ask you about technique. Did you use metaphor intentionally, like this is going to be my thing, or did it just turn out to be something that works for you? And are there other techniques now, when sitting down and getting to the writing that you employ as a writer, as a poet?
Yeah. Um. So in terms of technique, it's gonna sound um it's it's taken from my experiences and my experiences of being a rapper. Like I always like to say, um, it's gonna sound so bad, but like hear me out, okay? I'm the best at what I do because no one else can do what I do, right? The same way I think you're the best at what you do because no one else has been through what you do,
Mm,
and um makes what you do incredibly unique, right?
mhm.
So like my technique is very different because it's become like, oh, battle rap. Like it was about having the best punchlines. So
Okay.
like if you look at my poems, it's very punchline heavy. And I think it works in today's um society, just because like every 10, 15 seconds you're like, oh, that's witty. Oh,
Mhm.
that connects to this greater metaphor. Oh, that connects to this message.
Right.
Oh, is that a double entendre? Oh, that's a cool simile. So it's like I'm hitting you back to back to back to back to back. Um, I like to say my technique is very much um a double helix. If you ever seen like a DNA strand, right? So it's like you'll have a message and then you'll have a metaphor. They have all these lines connected in between,
Okay.
right? Um,
So
and
you're
that
using
way,
one message and one metaphor, like one consistent metaphor that you, or do you kind of use different things?
I sometimes use different metaphors.
Okay.
And sometimes it's a braid where I'm weaving different things together. Um, and you're like, oh, okay, he's talking about this, but he's using this and making it both macro and micro at the same time, using his personal experience and making it much larger. And so, like, those types of techniques, but it always goes back to like, okay, what am I saying with this line? What am I doing with this? And how am I being creative? And I think a lot of times when also people do punchlines or people are very punchliney poets, um, sometimes we do the setup punchline, right? And like set up punchline. But no, there's so many different ways you can do that. You can set up and punch in the same line. You can do punchline then the setup. You could do setup punchline punchline. You can do all these little tiny little things in your technique where you're like, okay, this is really. I feel like you're like,
I'm
but you're
like,
like,
you're confusing the people.
but like, it's never just like there was a this and then it turned out to be this magic trick, right? Like for instance when I say um set up punchline, right? um I have this poem, this breakup poem where it's like talks about a perfect list of perfect metaphors and I'm like uh even on a clock, um uh hands, I'm like even on a clock, uh hands can't wait to come across each other, right? Like, so even on a clock is the setup because now you're thinking about a clock, and then you're like, oh, hands can't wait to come
Okay.
across each other. Oh, clock has hands, people have hands.
Okay. So the
And
setup is like the context or like,
setup is the context for you to
okay.
think of like this metaphor, this thing, and
Okay.
then the punchline is like, hey, here's the thing, and here's how it connects to a better message. But
Okay.
then I follow that line up with their whole life revolves around it, right? So the life of a clock really revolves around these hands touching. So I'm like, I'm going back to the initial setup, but again, talking about this clock. But again, you can also do that in one line. It doesn't have to be do do do.
Mhm.
Um,
Quick
but
question.
yeah,
Do you do this as it's forming in your mind? Like, is that what's happening? Or do you think of like the subject? Like, are you thinking of a breakup? And here's what I want to say about the breakup. Like, it tore me to be like, that's a metaphor, but it made me really, really sad. Are you thinking of what you felt or what happened? And then after you put the punchlines or metaphors on it, or are the metaphors forming as you write? Do you
they're
get what I'm
forming
saying?
as I write because it's now the way
Okay.
I see the world, right?
Okay.
Like, I think I look at the world now. I'm like, oh, look at the snow outside. There's a metaphor in that. Each snowflake is
Okay.
different, right? Um, Imagine some being so cold, um the way the icicles form and reach out to the oxygen,
Okay.
right? Like you know what I'm saying? Like you could like I see the world, I'm like, oh okay, look at that.
Right.
That's something, there's something here. And I look at all these different things and I'm looking at the world these days and like, oh, everything's connected. And if
Hmm.
everything's connected, I can connect this in a poem. And so like everything's forming as I'm feeling it and as I'm seeing it. And I'm also like a person who explains themselves in analogies often.
Right.
And so people are like, is this a poem? I'm like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this. It's
It's
kind
just
of
the way
like
you
this.
understand things. Like it's the way, yeah, it
So
brings.
it's the way I communicate and the way I see things. And it really just lends itself to poetry really well. It's become a part of me.
Okay, nice. Um, yeah, you definitely are good at it.
Thank
To understate that, you're pretty good at it. Um, is there anything that's happening in the world right now that has your attention?
Yes. Um, so one thing that's happening in the world right now is after the competition was in Rio, then I ended up flying out to Sao Paulo to do some work, and I ended up going to this Aboriginal community center, and it was really cool. Um, and they welcomed me in, and they're like, you're a Ga person, right? Right. So I'm from Ghana. I'm like, my tribe is Ga. And they're like, oh, you're indigenous to Ghana, right? Like you're part of a tribe. You're an indigenous person as well. And then they welcome me in that, and then they're sharing their story. Um, and they're like, we ask you to share our story, and like they were talking about how deforestation has really um devastated that community, how there are thousands, now there's 305 of them. And they're like,
Wait,
hey,
wait, what was the last thing you said? I didn't catch that.
how deforestation has devastated their community, how
Yeah.
there are thousands of them, and now they're 305.
Wow, 305 people in a
Yeah.
population. Wow, that's crazy.
And then so they're like, yo, as a poet, talk about this, like share the platform. And I've been trying to figure out the best ways to do that. Um, and there's also this really interesting phenomenon. So there's that's going on in the world that's really
Right.
capturing my mind, and I think there's also this in Brazil there's a museum dedicated to a language, right? And I'm like, yo, that's wild. Um, I'm imagining what a museum dedicated to Ga would look like, right?
Mm.
And like, I think those of us who speak African languages, we know our languages are dying, right? We're
Are
not many
dying.
yeah, and not many people are speaking them like the way they
Mhm,
used to be in the past. And we
mhm.
know as generations go on, it's gonna dwindle, and it's a slow death. But we can't necessarily do much to stop it. We can try our best. I have days where I'm like, today's a no English day.
Mm.
In my household, and my parents will make fun of me. They're like, what do you know about? I'm like, no, I'm trying. I'm
You're trying.
trying.
Good.
Um, but so that's really that's a poem I've been stewing
Yes.
um and talking about how uh um it would be like a museum for Gown would be like a public autopsy, right? Um so like just like those lines are coming, and
Okay.
pretty sure the next time we chat I'll be like, hey, please like come see this poem. But yeah.
Somebody, I saw, there's an organization I should connect you to after this
Mm,
that's focused on languages. All of them, well, I can't say all, but like a lot of them in Ghana specifically. So, uh,
mm,
yeah, maybe that could be a resource for you.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love to perform in Ghana. I'd also love to. One of the things I wanted to do is
You have
stretch
to.
me
Uh-huh.
was I wanted to write a poem in Ga, and I was like, I haven't done this, and then I realized my sister's like, you can't write, and I was like, yeah, but I can memorize, I
You
can
can say
figure
how
out
it
a way
sounds.
to get it across, and
Yeah.
like if I have to write it in English and then perform it in Ga, I will do it, but I will figure it out,
But the words
and
will be the same. But we could write it phonetically.
yeah, yeah. So like little things like that to stretch you. I think poets just again new
Mm.
experiences continue to grow, continue to try new things.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Beautiful. Um, you kind of answered my last question, which was, what are you curious about? Anything to add to that?
I'm curious as to what poetry looks like in other mediums. More and more. Like I said, I'm seeing everything's connected. I'm like, okay, cool. What does poetry music look like, right? like if these notes were letters, right? How would I sing this poem, or how would I like the range in terms of, I feel like poets, when we do this, when we hit the punchline, we go really high, and then like all these different things. I'm like, how does that look like on a song? Or like really just breaking down the very minute details. I'm also like trying to explore film. Um, After today, I'm going to the beauty supply store. I'm gonna buy a couple of supplies. I'm trying to experiment with some props
Okay.
for something I want to work on before Black History Month. But
Beautiful.
we'll see. We'll see. Stay tuned.
Okay. Okay, stay tuned. Okay. How can we stay tuned with you? Where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Tupac Shakespeare. Um, if you're looking to book me, there's a website in my bio. There's a link in my bio. Um, for an email, you book me through Hamilton U Poets. That's generally the best way to book me. Nia's the one who handles a lot of those details, as I'm not the most organized person. I fall into that artist stereotype, but she really handles that and makes sure everything goes smoothly. So I can just focus on the poetry. Also, website will most likely be coming through at the end of the year. I have a couple other projects I really want to work on, but and book coming soon. The book is done.
Ooh,
I need to just, I heard no once and it really shattered me, and I really just need to be like, no, you know what? I want to hear no a couple of times. Let's get it out to some publishers, and that's finally, you know, get this thing to its fruition.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
you're very, very welcome.
Okay, so to close out, Eddie is going to share a poem with us. So I'm going to just close my screen so you can focus on him. And yes, enjoy, peoples.
The darkest pity party. Me and my shadow exchange horror stories about being black. I say to my shadow, I envy you. No one ever questions the quantity of your blackness. You're never too black or not black enough. You are always just simply black, without question, without interrogation. I envy how your hands have never felt the chill of cuffs, never been presumed guilty until proven dead, because no matter how hard they try, they can never kill a shadow. My shadow says to me, I know we both know what it's like to be a walking chalk outline. A shadow's place is either on the ground or against the wall. Everything that makes me uniquely beautiful is robbed of me in the nighttime. The warmth of my personality and flesh become the tone of nightmares. The skin, nothing more than the fingerprints of a violent night. They label me an angry black man, base my whole existence on throwing shade, and why wouldn't I be angry? I hate the way I stick out in white spaces. I, I try and comfort my shadow. I say, I wish I knew my history the way you do. I envy how close you are to the earth and our roots. The melanin in a shadow is a vow. You are the origin of black love. Watch how easily two shadows become one flesh. And I have never known a love like this. I love the way you flip the script. You, the original activist, you flip the script, appropriate their movements and call it normal. My shadow says call it conformity. Call it being puppeted. Call it being spoon fed a culture without spice. Us dark skinned individuals have never had the crown of normalcy, never been given the luxury of tears, even though it's clear I feel the weight of everything on top of it. And it's maddening. This code switching. In some lights, a shadow has to split itself in two to fit into a workplace where it's tokenized, invisible, present at every board meeting and cannot speak. Our glass ceilings the floor to be stepped on and stepped over, give new meaning to overshadowed, and we bond over these memories and pre-written destinies. A connection so close it is almost physical. Our kinship, Siamese like, a brotherhood so real we nod in verification upon meeting one another. For even boxers know, on some nights all you have is your shadow fighting with you, but cops know the best way to make shadows scatter is swirling lights.